What's up, guys? This slump continues. 2-2 yesterday, which small loss, so not the worst thing. Feels like at least we're kind of back to regularity, at least. But 2-2, not the best. I mean, Virginia Tech. I mean, that was lovely. That was a nice, easy win. It was one of their biggest win margins ever against Virginia, so that was good. You love those ones, but obviously they can't all be like that. Detroit Red Wings got there in overtime. And then the other two, both could have gotten there. Colgate was the worst of the two. They were never really winning by the margin that they needed to be winning by. They still won the game, but did not cover. Somehow Colgate, who's a team that is known for jacking up a ton of threes, they take like 22 three-pointers a game. They took 9 in the game last night and only hit 2 of them. So that's very strange. That's an outlier type of three-point performance from Colgate, to say the least. They're a team, like I said, they're known for just taking a ton of three-pointers. I don't know why they were not doing that in the game last night, just not playing a Colgate-style game. Very odd. And then the Chicago one was, God. I mean, they got outshot 42-17, so they did get outshot terribly. But one of the reasons that I forgot to mention in the video, one of the other things that made that, I think, a good play was that Carolina, they're a more defensive team than an offensive team. So you're asking them to cover this like giant puck line. They're not really a team that's that well equipped to do that. They're a better defensive team. They don't win by big margins a lot. They win a lot of like 1 and 2 score games, 1 and 2 goal games. But last night, of course, they got out to a 5-1 lead at one point. It was not looking very good. They had a huge shot discrepancy, but then Carolina kind of just did what they do and kind of just started trying to just play defense, and they did not play good defense in that game, right? They let Chicago get back into it, and it was 5-3. I think within the final 2 minutes of the game, it was 5-3. So it looked like, all right, Chicago's going to get it done and cover the plus 2.5 puck line here, and we're going to have a 3-1 night. That's looking pretty good. No, they give up an unnecessary goal. It wasn't even an empty netter. For some reason, Carolina just scored a totally unnecessary goal in the final like minute and 40-something seconds or something to push it above the 2.5 again. That's just insanely frustrating. Losing on a goal that is totally meaningless, and it's not even an empty netter right near the end. Absolutely ridiculous. Move on to today. I got 4 plays as it stands right now today. College basketball, we got some interesting matchups for sure. One game that I almost want is we have another one of those ranked at unranked teams where the unranked home team against the ranked road team is actually the favorite. So the unranked home team is actually the favorite. And as I mentioned with Virginia Tech last night, this has been a money maker this year, but I just don't like where the number is here. If it was closer to where it opened, I guess, down near a pick'em, I might want it, and that would be on Utah State. I still would only lean to the Utah State side, but I don't think I can actually lay 2.5 with them. It looks like it's going even higher. They're up from a pick'em to 2.5 with juice, possibly even going to 3. I don't see any of the percentages on any of these games yet, but Utah State is, again, one of those home unranked teams against a road ranked team, but KenPom does have San Diego State. The reason that keeps you off of this a little bit is KenPom has San Diego State ranked 18th in the country, Utah State down at 41st, which isn't that much of a huge discrepancy, but he does have San Diego State power rated to win this game by 1. So that's just a little bit much for me. If this line was anywhere like up to maybe 2 on Utah State, I might say, yeah, we can jump in on this one. I don't like bucking the power ratings by 3.5 points, but if it was like 2.5, maybe, especially when it's through 0, which doesn't matter as much when it's just to pick the winner. But now you're asking Utah State to win by more than a bucket, and that's just a little much. But the spot isn't good for San Diego State, I will say that. Even though, yeah, maybe they'll still be up for a game against Utah State, but they did also beat Utah State already at home. We know in the Mountain West, the home advantage seems to be larger in the Mountain West than in any other conference. And San Diego State did beat Utah State already by 14 at home, so maybe that'll have them not totally focused, but they do not have a big game up next. Next, they just have Fresno State, so they're not going to have a look ahead in this situation, but they are coming off a couple of pretty big games in a row where they lost by 4 at Nevada. That was a close game where I was on Nevada there. Came home and they got revenge, I believe, against Colorado State for losing to them on the road, and then they also got revenge against New Mexico for losing to them on the road. Home teams just winning every game in the Mountain West, basically. So a couple of big wins there for San Diego State since coming back home. And now it is going to be Utah State's turn to try to get some revenge, as they did lose at San Diego State earlier this year. And that was at a point where they, I believe, were ranked when that game happened, and San Diego State was not. So that was actually an unranked home team, probably as the favorite in San Diego State there against a ranked underdog, road underdog. So that's weird. Yeah, San Diego State was a 6.5 point favorite in that one. So that was, that was a similar situation to this. It's crazy how these rankings shift. So Utah State was actually the ranked of the two teams back then, and they were the road underdog in that one. So that's also odd. So I do like Utah State here, and they're coming off a bad loss, really. A couple of not great games, really, on the road there. They only won by 8 at Utah, and then they got blown out by 20 at Colorado State. But that was revenge for Colorado State because Utah State beat them at home. It's these home teams just winning everything. Maybe I do want Utah State here at 2.5. I might talk myself into it. Utah State definitely in a bounce back spot, and they also only have Fresno up next, and that's not for a week. So they don't have much to look ahead to, and they're in a bounce back spot coming off that ugly loss. And people might have recency bias here and just look at the syllogism in the last two performances, the most recent games between these teams and Colorado State, the common opponent there, and say, well, wait a minute, San Diego State and New Mexico even, and say San Diego State just beat New Mexico and Colorado State, and Utah State just lost to both of them in their most recent matchups, although those are on the road. Actually, Utah State hasn't played New Mexico a second time yet. That's the last game of the season. People might look at that and see Utah State lost pretty badly to Colorado State in their last game, even though it was on the road, and they lost by double digits to New Mexico the prior game that they played against the game that they played against New Mexico earlier in the season. Even though, yes, those are both on the road, and see, well, San Diego State just beat those two teams by double digits, although, yeah, they were at home, but does that mean we should jump in on Utah State here? Going with the spot that's been like money this year. Bucking the power ratings a little bit if we do this. I don't know, man. I don't know if I quite want to do it, but yeah, fuck it. Let's do it. 2.5 Utah State. It's just a half point, maybe a half point off from where I would really like to see it, but I think the spot's just strong enough. It's been a situation that's been good. So we'll take Utah State. And then the other two games I'm going to be on are going to be on Creighton +3. UConn, where's UConn here? I believe they've gone up a little bit actually from 2 to 3, it looks like. So you might be able to get an even better number than 3 on Creighton here. Connecticut is, of course, one of the best teams in the country, but I think Creighton is being underrated. I think that's really the thing here. I don't think Connecticut is necessarily being overrated by that much. I think they are one of the top teams. KenPom has them ranked the second best team in the country right now, behind, I believe, Houston. And Purdue third. Yeah, so he still has those teams clustered right at the top in the top 3. They've kind of just been like flip-flopping in his top 3, but they've been the top 3 for a while. The problem is, not a problem, really. The reason why I like the value on Creighton here is that Creighton's actually a very underrated team. Maybe not very, because I think they're still ranked, rated 15th. They're ranked 15th in the AP polls there now, but KenPom has them as the 13th team, but power ratings wise, he does not have Creighton that far behind Connecticut, and he has Connecticut only winning this game by 2 on the road at Creighton. Creighton getting some decent home court too, which I think is valid. Creighton, pretty good all-around team, man. Both of these teams are really good all-around teams, and yes, Connecticut is the slightly better team. UConn, but not by that much. And in this spot, I think it's not very good for UConn. I mean, UConn already beat Creighton by 14 at home at UConn, and that was a game where Creighton was just really, really stifled offensively. They had a lot of turnovers in the game. UConn dominated them on the boards, which UConn is a good rebounding team, sure. Neither team shot well in the game. The shooting percentages are actually pretty close, so the tail of the game was really turnovers, but UConn just kind of dominated the game on the scoreboard and ran away with it, and they were up 20 points in the middle of the second half, kind of put it away. And it was one of Creighton's lowest scoring games of the season because Creighton is a team that can score. And that was a game that was slowed down. So I think it was more Connecticut's pace. Connecticut's one of the slowest paced teams in the country. And Creighton, they're not a fast team, but they play faster than UConn does. KenPom has Creighton 221st in tempo, so still pretty slow in the bottom third, but Connecticut 327th, one of the absolute slowest teams. So Connecticut was able to slow that pace down in that first matchup big time. That might have Connecticut just feeling a little bit overconfident here because they already beat Creighton once. Creighton's really going to be stepping it up for this game, and of course they are. They have UConn coming into their house. For the Big East, for these teams that are East Coast teams like UConn, going to Omaha to play on the road is also kind of a weird spot. That's kind of a tough spot. You're going out, you're changing time zones. You're going out to the Midwest. That's a bit weird. So it'll be a bit more of a comfortable spot for Creighton. Creighton might be able to, change the pace a little bit in this game, speed it up more than what the game was in UConn. Creighton is coming off a pretty decent win over Butler, but it's nothing like what UConn is coming off of, man. And UConn does actually have Butler up next, so I don't know if that's going to be cause for a look ahead to Butler. But and UConn did already beat Butler at home, but only beat them by 9. Or excuse me, my mistake. UConn has Villanova up next, and UConn actually only beat Villanova by 1 on the road. So maybe they would look ahead to Villanova a little bit, just because Villanova gave them a real scare at Villanova. So maybe UConn has a little bit of look ahead to that. But really, this is a letdown spot for UConn at the very least, because what are they coming off of? They're coming off of that spotlight game on Saturday, the number 1 UConn versus the number 4 Marquette. This is going to be like the best game. And I told you in my video, I leaned to UConn to cover the number in there just because I thought the average bettor was going to look and say UConn's favored by 7 or whatever in this game. That's a huge number for a game where it's a 1 versus a 4. That number is huge, right? Like, we got to be getting value with Marquette here, right? Because it's going to be a competitive game. I was like, yeah, I'm not so sure about that. Marquette's good, but they're a bit overrated. I mean, they're down at 14, even though I just said Creighton's only 13. But with KenPom's power ratings, with the way the home court advantage works out and stuff like that, KenPom has this game much closer than the UConn game, the Marquette UConn game. Although the Marquette UConn game, I think he had around 6 or 7. But UConn absolutely blasted Marquette, man. That was a statement if I've ever seen one, an absolute blowout win. Marquette did not shoot very well in the game, and UConn once again dominated the boards in that game. But UConn's got to be feeling really high and mighty after a game like that. That's just a total destruction in a game that's supposed to be competitive between 2 top 4 teams. UConn's got to be feeling real high on themselves. Now they have to go out to Omaha to play a team they already beat and held to 48 points and beat pretty easily. I don't know if they're going to really have full focus in a game like this. Whereas Creighton, I think they will, even though Creighton, they're coming off a decent win, also kind of a blowout win on the road at Butler. So pretty decent win for Creighton there. But Creighton is a good team, man, and they continue to fly just a little bit under the radar, even though they are ranked kind of around where they should be at 15th. I think they just don't really get quite the credit that maybe they should, because people are still kind of like, yeah, it's Creighton. I mean, they're like a mid-major name, so yeah, they're good, but of course they're not as good as UConn. I mean, that's true, they're not as good as UConn. That's why UConn's the favorite on the road here, but getting 3 points, I think that number's a little bit high in a spot like this. It's a weird travel spot and a major letdown spot for UConn, I would say. And the fact that they already beat Creighton might have them just a little bit not totally focused in a game like this for Creighton. So I like Creighton +3. So we're going with all of the teams that are the lower ranked team at home in these 3 games here against the higher ranked team that's on the road here. And 2 of them, we're going to be taking a home favorite that's the lesser ranked team. And the other one's going to be BYU over Baylor. I'm going to lay 3.5 with BYU. I think it's 3.5 right now. Unfortunately, it's shot up really quick from 1 all the way up through 3.5. It's now at 4. KenPom has the number at 3. BYU has been really underrated all year. Like, KenPom still has them at the 16th best team in the country, although he has Baylor at 12th. But he had BYU in the top 10 for a while. So BYU's kind of been all over the place a bit. BYU, very good offensive team, not a very good defensive team, but same with Baylor. I mean, BYU is almost as good offensively as Baylor, and they're actually better defensively than Baylor. So I don't even see how BYU is ranked a little bit lower than Baylor is in KenPom's ratings. And the other thing about this is that Baylor is a slowdown team. They're at 281st in KenPom in tempo. BYU much, much faster at 87th in tempo. So BYU is going to want to speed up the pace here. And BYU almost as good offensively, 8th in offensive efficiency in KenPom, where Baylor's 4th. So not really that much of a discrepancy there. BYU 53rd in defense and Baylor 77th. So KenPom has Baylor the significantly, well, maybe not significantly, but Baylor the somewhat worse defensive team, but only really slightly better offensive team. So I don't know how he has BYU ranked behind Baylor really in the power ratings there, because it seems like he would have BYU slightly above them. But either way, in the rankings are definitely off, with Baylor being the 11th team. That's about right, I would say, because KenPom has them at 12th, but BYU down only at 25th. They've been underrated all year, really, man. And they're now almost dropping out of the rankings entirely, but KenPom still has them as the 16th best team when they're 25th. BYU, very tough place to play. And for these, they're new to the Big 12, so these Big 12 teams going on the road out there, and of course, Baylor has not played BYU on the road yet. These Big 12 teams having to go out on the road to BYU, it tends to be a pretty difficult spot for them, man. As I keep saying, having to go out to Utah to play BYU, not an easy spot for these Big 12 teams. You're going up into elevation. It's not a spot that they're familiar with at this point, with BYU being new to it. And Baylor, I don't think they're in the best spot either, really, because I thought they might get caught in that West Virginia game. They didn't, so they continued rolling. But now this is a second straight road game, and they have Houston up in 4 days, and they did already beat BYU at home. And I believe they covered. Yeah, Baylor was a 4.5-point favorite. It was a close game. I think it was a game where I thought BYU might be in a decent spot there to cover that. And it was pretty close, but Baylor still was able to win and cover. And like I said, Baylor, so they've already beaten BYU once, and they do have Houston up next. So it's possible they have one eye looking forward already to the Houston game, even though they're not really in a letdown spot, because beating West Virginia is kind of like, who cares, really? Although I care, because I lost a bet on that one. But even so, I think Baylor might not be fully focused on BYU, and it's a tough spot to go into and play. It's a second straight road game, and with Houston up next, obviously it's not the easiest place to play. It looks like the market is in agreement with me on this play and on all three of these plays. And BYU, they're about to drop out of the rankings, and a lot of it has to do with not playing very well in their last few games. They've actually not played well for a while now. They've played some of the lower teams in the Big 12 here, going to West Virginia, and yeah, they won that game by 13, although Baylor won by 16-17, but yeah, that's kind of a wash. But still, playing West Virginia, not impressive. Then they went to Oklahoma, BYU did, and they lost by 16. They came back home, and it was a spot where I thought BYU should demolish Kansas State, because BYU was coming back home off of not playing very well on the road, have the home court advantage, and Kansas State was coming off the Kansas game, beating Kansas. So Kansas State was really in a bad spot there, and I laid the 11 with BYU on that one, and BYU only won by 6, but that was kind of a misleading final, because BYU was winning that game by double digits with not that much time left, and Kansas State, I think, went on like an 8-0 run, or maybe even more than that, closer to the end there. So just some weird run, like in a crucial moment there, that really just took the spread play away from me and from BYU there. So very unfortunate. And then BYU didn't play well in the next game after that, with UCF coming into their house. Although, well, didn't play well, I don't know, maybe because UCF did shoot pretty well in the game. But BYU was dominating, dude. They were up by almost 20 points and leading by double digits. They were leading the whole game pretty much, and they were winning by a blowout for a lot of it. They were winning by double digits for most of the second half, and then UCF made a crazy run like right near the end of the game. I saw the end of that game. The game looked like it was over the whole time, and then UCF made just a really, really ridiculous late comeback and actually almost had a chance to win the game at the end. But that final looks a lot closer than the game was. BYU was a 13.5-point favorite in that one. And BYU was winning by double digits and really dominating for almost the majority of that game. So that was a misleading outcome as well. That game wasn't actually that close. I almost fell into that trap and said that was a close game, but the final score doesn't look good. So you'd think that might put a scare into BYU, but then they had to go on the road not really an easy thing to do to go on the road in the Big 12 here, especially when you're new to the Big 12 and you're not familiar with it. And they got really kind of blown out by Oklahoma State. That's really ugly, getting blown out by one of the bottom two teams in the conference, Oklahoma State and West Virginia, the two worst teams in the conference. That's a pretty unacceptable loss, and I think BYU is going to really be angry after that loss. And you look at that game, Oklahoma State shot almost 60% from the field and 50% from three, and BYU was only 23% from three. That is a total outlier. Oklahoma State's not even a good shooting team, and having them shoot 60% from the floor and 50% from three, that's just ridiculous. That's a total outlier. That's not going to happen again. Even though Baylor's a good offensive team, I don't think they're going to put up numbers that are that good. Despite BYU's defense being a bit challenged, I don't think that's going to happen. BYU's a much better home team. I think they're they are in an embarrassed spot here, I would have to say. It looks like this line might be climbing up even further a little bit. I was able to jump on it at 3.5, which I think is that's close to where you want it to be. Maybe 3.5, maybe 4 might be the most I would want here. But BYU, I mean, they're previous two home games, those results are misleading. They actually had much bigger leads in those games than the final score would indicate. I like this one here. And then the other thing is Baylor already beat BYU at home, I believe, already. So, yeah, they beat them by 9. Yeah, I think I already mentioned that. But so it all sets up for a nice spot for BYU here. I think they're in a bounce back spot where they're going to be really angry and really in an embarrassed mood after kind of almost blowing big leads in their 2 prior home games and then having an awful performance at Oklahoma State. That's got to be like the straw that breaks the camel's back, really. Something's got to give here. So I expect a much better performance from BYU. They're much better at home as well. And Baylor, I just really don't like the spot for them. I think it's a tough spot for them. Going to hockey, we have some interesting games where there are teams that are in bad spots, but a lot of them are playing each other, like the New York Rangers coming off that crazy comeback and overtime win in the not the Winter Classic, but in the Stadium Series at MetLife there against the New York Islanders. So I don't think I don't think the Rangers are really in a good spot, but Dallas might be in an even worse spot, having lost in a shootout to the Bruins yesterday. The Bruins had a tying goal really close to the end of that game. Dallas had my Bruins on the ropes in Boston. That's a really tough game for Dallas to be coming out of. And they played an overtime game 2 days before that, too, against Edmonton. So now Dallas is facing a back-to-back off 2 really tough games and a third game in 4 days, all in different cities. So I don't want any part of Dallas there. I would lean to the Rangers slightly in that one, but I don't think the Rangers are in the best spot either. So can't quite do it there. They're up from -140 to -141 with 77% of the cash and 75% of the tickets. So Rangers, a little bit public, but they are also they have a little bit of the cash discrepancy there. I don't like the spot the Minnesota's, and that's for sure. This one's tough. Maybe I do want to jump in on Winnipeg here and actually make it 3 hockey plays here because Minnesota is just in such an awful spot here, dude. And I do like what I'm seeing in the market, even though Winnipeg's down from -160 to -156 as a home favorite. That's a pretty slight favorite to be laying with a team like Winnipeg here, one of the better teams in hockey. Minnesota's got 67% of the tickets right now, but 54% of the cash over on the other side on Winnipeg, even though it's not really reflected in the line movement, which has gone down just slightly. But should we jump in on Winnipeg here too, -155? Yeah, why not? I think it's a small price. So we're going to get on 3 hockey games here. This is going to get a little crazy with only being like 7 hockey games on the slate, and we're going to be on 3 of them. The spot for Minnesota is just, it is awful, dude. Like, I like the spot a lot better for Winnipeg. Both of these teams played yesterday, but what did Minnesota do? They not only did they beat Vancouver, but I thought it was a bad spot for Vancouver. But now they're going to be both of these teams are going to be in a back-to-back. Minnesota is going to be playing a 3rd game in 4 days, not all in different cities because the first 2 games are at home. So they were at home yesterday, and now they're going up to Winnipeg. Not huge travel and starting a road trip, but look at the game they're coming off of, dude. Everybody heard about that game probably because Minnesota was losing the game 5-2 at one point late in the second period. And then including a goal in the final minute of the third period, in the final minute of the second period, they scored 6 unanswered goals and took an 8-5 lead. Then they blew that, and then it was 8-7 in the final couple minutes of the game. Then they got 2 empty net goals at the end there to push it up to 10-7. I believe 3 different players had hat tricks in the game. This game was statistically absolutely insane. Minnesota, during that stretch that I mentioned, scored 6 goals in a span of like under 6 minutes, which I think was the 4th shortest time span in NHL history that a team has scored 6 goals. And they did it without giving up a goal. Scored 6 in a row. Like I said, there were 3 hat tricks in the game. I think maybe 2 of them on Minnesota and 1 of them on Vancouver. 2 different players had 6 points in the game, I believe, something like that. This is just absolutely insane. The game wound up being 10-7, despite the fact that there were only 51 shots in the game on goal, 51 shots and 17 goals scored. Horrible save percentages from both goalies here. Just total insanity going on in that game. It's one of the most insane games that will ever be played in the NHL, really. And Minnesota's coming off that. Not only was that game just absolute insanity, but they put up 10 goals and they beat Vancouver. Now coming off of that, are they really in the best spot? Even though, yeah, it's against Winnipeg, one of the better teams in hockey. Sure, but coming off that game, I don't know if they're going to just have their full energy. That game was just an absolutely insane barn burner. They're coming off that game and having to play again right away against Winnipeg. Winnipeg did also play last night, and yes, they are also in a 3rd game in 4 days, and they're playing it all in different cities, and they're returning home, but they didn't have that much travel either. It was a 2-game road trip that took them out to Vancouver and then Calgary, but I like the spot that they're in much better because they are coming off a pretty ugly loss. Like yesterday was kind of their bad spot, I would say, in that stretch. They'd beaten Vancouver the game before this. So actually it was kind of a bad spot yesterday, coming off a win over Vancouver, then having to go into Calgary before having Minnesota coming up after this, even though they have beaten Minnesota the last 2 times they played them. So is Minnesota going to be focused just because of that reason, because there's revenge? I don't think revenge really matters very much, especially when you're going to be focused anyway, because Winnipeg's a good team, so you want to beat Winnipeg. It's just that I don't know if Minnesota's really going to have anything left in the tank here after such an insane game yesterday. And on the other side, Winnipeg, they didn't really play a very good game. The game was closer than the final score looks on. There was an empty netter at the end of that game too, but they wound up losing 6-3. It seems like there are a lot of 6-3 hockey games. It's crazy how many are 6-3. The game that I lost on yesterday, unfortunately, wound up being 6-3, and this Calgary game wound up being 6-3. And a couple of the games, the previous games to the games involving the teams that I played the other day were also 6-3 finals. So this is just kind of ridiculous, though. Winnipeg coming off a bad loss, a 6-3 loss. They were actually winning the game 3-2 at the end of the first period. They were winning 3-1 in the first period, and then they never scored again. So that's just pretty ugly, giving up 5 straight goals to a team that's not really great in the Calgary Flames. I think Winnipeg's going to want to turn it around. I think they're going to be in kind of an angry mood here. They're going to want to do something here. They're the better team as well. And they're getting kind of a short price here, probably because of the travel spot. Travel spot a little bit worse for Winnipeg, but not by that much. And rest spot, both teams are playing a 3rd game in 4 days. It's just that Winnipeg has a slightly additional travel there as well. But Minnesota, I think that all gets negated by Minnesota coming off such a wild, pun intended, game yesterday. That game was absolute madness. I don't see how you turn around and you play a great game after that. I like Winnipeg. We're laying a kind of a short price in a spot like this on Winnipeg to just win the game at -155 or whatever. So we'll jump on Winnipeg. On the other side of that, I don't like Vancouver either, but I just don't think I'm going to get there with Vancouver because I don't think it's a good spot for the Avalanche either. Well, actually, it's an all right spot for the Avalanche. They returned home in their previous game and beat Arizona and only beat them by 1. So I do think Colorado's in a more positive spot here. And Colorado is the more rested team because they did not play yesterday. And they're up against Vancouver, the other side of that absolutely insane game yesterday. But something tells me Vancouver's just going to have a little bit more focus. If they are in a third game in 4 days, all in different cities as well, they're having to go to Colorado. Colorado's only laying minus 145, up from minus 140 to minus 145, 91% of the cash and only 61% of the tickets on Colorado. So I do lean to the Avalanche. It's maybe not quite as strong a play, but I do like the Avalanche in that one as well. Definitely not a good spot and really not a good rest spot for Vancouver, but I kind of think both teams are going to be focused in that one because it is kind of a big game. It's a collision between two good teams there, so that's what kind of keeps the offense just a little bit, but Colorado is definitely in the much better spot there. They're the more rested team, and they're not laying that much of a price there, really, so I do like Colorado there. It's definitely tempting. I will be on Pittsburgh, the Pittsburgh Penguins. Well, I like too many hockey games here against the New York Islanders. I like the spot for Pittsburgh here, even though Pittsburgh cost me in their prior game, which shouldn't have happened. They're up from minus 125 to minus 133 at home, 94% of the cash, but 82% of the tickets. So they're the public team, but it's hockey. I mean, hockey gets a little bit less play just in the marketplace in general. The public doesn't play hockey as much, really. They are going to be on Pittsburgh in this game, unfortunately, because Pittsburgh is the better team and the more name team, but the spot I think is much better. So Pittsburgh, unfortunately, coming off that game where I thought that the Kings were in a really bad spot. Pittsburgh had a 1-0 lead pretty late in the game. They wound up blowing the whole thing and losing 2-1 on what wound up being a shorthanded goal at the end. That's a pretty ugly loss, even though it's to a good Kings team. Pittsburgh had that game, and it was an emotional high, yeah, because it was the Yager night and whatever, but they're coming off that. I still think they're going to want to win this game against the Islanders, even though I do think they beat the Islanders the last time they played in the – excuse me. But Pittsburgh, I mean, they are the better team here. They don't have anything up next, really. Montreal, nobody really cares about that. Pittsburgh beat Montreal the last time they played them, too, although it was an overtime game at home. But I think this is a worse spot for the Islanders. So Pittsburgh has 1 day off. They're just kind of staying at home, even though, yeah, they are off kind of an emotional high. But that was still kind of an ugly loss there in a game where I think they know they should have won that game. So I think they're going to have a little bit more focus on the Islanders. On the other hand, they have to travel, and they also only have 1 day off. But they're coming off that crazy, crazy barn burner of a game, rivalry game in the Stadium Series against the Rangers. And I think it's a worse spot coming out of this game for the Islanders than it is for the Rangers, because the Rangers at least wound up winning that game. But the way the Islanders blew that game, I mean, they had the Rangers on the ropes. The Rangers are their rival. Huge, huge get-up game for the Islanders, and the Islanders had them on the ropes, man. Islanders as the worst team, the underdog in that situation. The Islanders had a 5-3 lead in the final, 5 minutes of the game. They were up 5-3, and they gave up 2 power play goals. I don't know if there were some tic-tac penalties going on there, but the Islanders had more shots in the game. They were the less physical team, but that's just kind of the way they play hockey. And they had a 68% face-off percentage, so the Islanders were just the much better team in the game, really, statistically, other than not being the more physical team. They had the 5-3 lead. I don't know what the penalties were on, but they gave up 2 power play goals in the final 5 minutes of regulation and then lost in overtime. That's a devastating way to lose that game, man. You have your big rival in a focus game that's in the Stadium Series, so everybody gets up for that game. It's a bigger spot there, bigger game. You're coming out of that. They got to be in a hangover spot here, man. Even if it is a team that's a little bit better than they are on the road, I think it's a real tough spot for them. It's a better spot for Pittsburgh, even though Pittsburgh, yeah, the Yager game, an emotional high, fine. But I think they're going to be more pissed off about that loss than the Islanders will be. That Islanders game is just a crazy, wild game, whereas at least the Pittsburgh game, Pittsburgh was actually the favorite in the game, even though it was against the Kings. So Pittsburgh really thinks that they should have won that game, whereas the Islanders, even though, they think they should have won that game, they're also the underdogs. So they had that mentality going into it. And when you come that close as an underdog in a huge rivalry game in a Stadium Series like that, it's a letdown spot. So I'll play the Pittsburgh Penguins again in that one. And then I am also going to fade the Los Angeles Kings. They're in a bad spot. The Kings that I just mentioned, they're returning home from a road trip now. That was a 4-game road trip that took them out to the East Coast. They went 3-1 on the road trip, losing the first game badly at Buffalo. by 7, but now they're playing a 5th game in 8 days on the return home, all in different cities. It's a 3rd game in 4 days, a 4th and 6, and a 5th and 8. Yeah, all in different cities. This is just a really, really, really difficult spot for them, and playing an awful team like Columbus coming into their house, and they're coming off beating Boston in overtime, and then having that ridiculous win that they pulled out of their ass at Pittsburgh too to close the road trip, and now only 1 day off. They're going to suffer the return home distractions. You'd have to think it's going to be a distracted spot returning home, having to fly back cross country across multiple time zones, no time off. You have to deal with your getting your home affairs back in order, and you have at least a team against a decent team up next, even though you did beat them on the road the last time you played them in Nashville. It's at least a better team than Columbus. I don't think Columbus is going to get the Kings' full focus, and Columbus is in a better spot. They've had 2 days off, and they've already been out in the Pacific time zone because they played that game where I was on them, actually, and they beat San Jose in a game that was not a good spot for San Jose. Now they've had 2 days off, which is that going to disrupt any momentum that they have? I'm not sure about that. I think they're just going to rest up a little bit. Beating San Jose is not really that big a deal, and it might help maybe start some momentum. And I don't think having 2 days off is really going to crush the momentum. I think it's just going to help them focus on the game against the Kings. They play tomorrow against Anaheim, but the Kings are a much bigger team here. So I think the Kings are going to draw Columbus's focus here because they're a good team, a much better team. So I think Columbus is going to be focused here. So I like it. This is sitting at LA minus 250 on the money line, just kind of sitting there. And they have 94% of the cash, 100% of the tickets. I don't buy that. There's no way that that's true. But at any rate, what you can do here, what you can get is you can make it a spread bet at a decent price here. You can actually get the Blue Jackets plus the 1.5 goals at minus 105 right now. So that's what we're going to do, and sprinkle a little bit on the money line at plus 220 as well, I believe here. And that's going to be it for all those plays here, man. So we can do that. We can do it right now, actually, I guess. So I like that for all those reasons I just stated. It's a much better rest spot for Columbus. It's a really horrible spot on the return home for the Kings. I don't think I'm going to get there with the Avalanche, but the plays today, one more time, are in college basketball. I got 6 plays, man. I don't know. Maybe I'm not being selective enough of that, and that's why I'm not doing well here, but something's got to turn around because I do like these spots. College basketball, Creighton plus 3, BYU minus 3.5, Utah State minus 2.5, hockey, Pittsburgh minus 135, Winnipeg minus 155, and Columbus Blue Jackets plus 1.5 on the puck line. That's going to do it, man. Let's kick it off right. Let's get something turned around here. Peace.